Lauren had always been a restless sleeper, but it wasn't until her late 20s that her sleepwalking episodes took a sinister turn. At first, it was small things, waking up on the couch when she swore she'd fallen asleep in bed, or finding her slippers near the front door, even though she never remembered putting them there. She shrugged it off, chalking it up to stress. Then, one morning, she woke up with dirt under her nails and bruises dotting her legs. She stared at herself in the bathroom mirror, running her fingers over the marks on her thighs, as if they might tell her their story. Her first thought was that she'd somehow fallen during one of her nighttime wanderings. But as the weeks passed, the incidents became more bizarre. She woke up outside a park bench one night, the steps of the old church another. Once, she found herself in the woods at the edge of town, her clothes damp with dew, her feet bare and cut. The small town of Ashwood wasn't large enough for secrets, and people began to notice Lauren's strange behavior. "Saw you walking around last night," her coworker Pam mentioned casually one morning at the library. "You okay? You looked lost." "I was sleepwalking," Lauren replied quickly, hoping to end the conversation. But Pam didn't drop it. "You were in the alley behind Dawson's, just standing there. Gave me the creeps." Lauren's heart sank. She had no memory of it. That night, she locked her bedroom door. She even pushed her dresser in front of it for good measure. "You okay? You looked lost." "I was sleepwalking," Lauren replied quickly, hoping to end the conversation. But Pam didn't drop it. "You were in the alley behind Dawson's, just standing there. Gave me the creeps." Lauren's heart sank. She had no memory of it. That night, she locked her bedroom door. She even pushed her dresser in front of it for good measure. But when she woke up the next morning, she was lying on the roof of an abandoned gas station, the sunrise painting the horizon in muted oranges and pinks. The notes began appearing shortly after. At first, she thought they were from kids playing a prank. A slip of paper was tucked under her windshield wiper as she left work. "Do you know where you go at night?" The second note, found in her mailbox, was worse. "You're being watched." Lauren tried to tell herself it was nothing. But when she found a third note on her kitchen counter inside her locked house, she couldn't ignore the growing unease in her chest. This one was chillingly direct. "Stop looking." She tried to confide in her friend Megan. Over coffee, Lauren hesitated, staring into her mug as she spoke. "I think someone's following me. They know things about me, things they shouldn't." Megan frowned. "What do you mean?" Lauren hesitated. How could she explain the inexplicable? How could she admit she wasn't even sure of her own actions anymore? Instead, she said, "It's probably nothing. Forget I said anything." Megan didn't push, but Lauren saw the doubt in her eyes. The breaking point came 3 nights later. Lauren woke up in the woods again, her hands buried in the earth. Her fingers were numb, the skin cracked and bleeding. She sat up with a start, her breath catching in her throat. Beside her lay a rusty shovel, its blade streaked with damp soil. The ground in front of her was freshly disturbed. Her stomach churned, bile rising in her throat. She staggered back, the edges of her vision swimming. What had she been doing? Why was she here? The following day, she bought a small camera and set it up in her bedroom. If she couldn't trust herself, maybe she could trust technology. That night, she bolted her door, shoved the dresser back in place, and climbed into bed. The next morning, the dresser was pushed aside, the door unlocked. She woke up sprawled across her living room floor, her clothes damp and smeared with dirt. Her hands shook as she played the footage. The video began with her tossing and turning, the sheets twisting around her legs. Then, at exactly 3:14 a.m., she sat up abruptly, her eyes wide and glassy. She stared directly at the camera, her head tilting unnaturally to the side. Lauren's lips moved, but no sound came out. She leaned forward, her face filling the screen. The longer she stared, the more Lauren's skin crawled. Then slowly, she turned to the door. The dresser slid aside as if pushed by an invisible force. The lock clicked open. Lauren wasn't alone. A shadowed figure stepped into the frame. It was tall and impossibly thin, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It stood behind her for several minutes, watching as she rose and walked out of the room. Lauren paused the video, her breath caught in her throat. Driven by a mix of terror and desperation, Lauren returned to the woods that night. The shovel was still there, lying where she dropped it. The disturbed patch of earth looked even more ominous in the moonlight. Her hands trembled as she began to dig. Each shovelful of dirt felt heavier than the last, the silence of the woods pressing down on her like a weight. Then she saw it. A hand, pale and lifeless, protruding from the soil. She staggered back, her legs giving out beneath her. Her stomach heaved, but she couldn't tear her eyes away. She knew that hand. Mrs. Calloway had been missing for weeks. The kindly older woman who lived 3 doors down, who always had a kind word and a plate of cookies for the neighborhood kids. And now she was here, buried in the woods. Lauren clapped a hand over her mouth, bile rising in her throat. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until it was too late. A cold hand gripped her shoulder. Lauren spun around, her scream catching in her throat. It was the figure from the video, its gaunt face inches from hers. Its eyes were hollow pits, and its mouth twisted into something that resembled a smile but felt entirely wrong. "You're doing well," it rasped, its voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. Lauren tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure tilted its head, studying her. "Don't stop now. There's more work to be done." With that, it faded into the shadows, leaving Lauren alone with the half-buried body. Lauren didn't sleep that night. She sat on her living room floor, her knees pulled to her chest as she replayed the events in her mind. She couldn't go to the police. How could she explain the unexplainable? By morning, she'd convinced herself it wasn't real. It couldn't be. It was a dream, a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation and stress. As dawn broke over Ashwood, Lauren sat in her kitchen, the knife still clutched in her hand. The shadowed figure stood in the corner, watching her. It smiled, and Lauren smiled back. She wasn't sleepwalking anymore.